But it's a mindset change, right? People like us come in and say, move fast and break things, and trust us, and we're going to go off and talk to 50 people remotely, and then come back and give you some insights. But we don't know yet what those insights will be. I mean, I love that, but I can see why for people who aren't bought into that way of thinking, it's quite challenging, or can be.
When I see that, for example, exactly product managers are like, wow, okay, this is changing and this is saving me money and this is making me or this is helping me make a decision way easier, way better.
A stitch in time saves 9, and if you do the right research and understand the user needs up front, you can save a lot of time and heartache and money.
Yeah, I love this moment where you're actually, it's not even the well-known aha moment, but the moment where like, oh, we just saved so much
Yes,
money.
and heartache and sweat and tears and Hi, I'm Mike Green, a freelance user research lead and digital consultant based in the UK. Welcome to Understanding Users. In this podcast series, I chat with digital experts from a variety of disciplines, including user research, UX and service design, development, and product management. And there's even a founder or two. I talk to them about how they came to be in their current roles, what they've learned along the way, and the challenges they face in designing and building digital products and services with users in mind. And while many of these conversations are recorded remotely, I'm also keen to get out into the wild and meet my guests face to face where possible. So in some episodes, you'll hear me prowling the corridors of UX conferences in different parts of the globe to get the views of speakers and attendees alike. These are intended to be relaxed, informal chats with professionals who are keen to share their experiences. So sit back and enjoy. I'm delighted to announce that Understanding Users has a sponsor. Have you or your team ever struggled with getting the right types of users at the right time to speak to in your research? Have you wasted hours emailing to and fro with research participants trying to find a convenient time to speak to them? And after all that, have you found yourself speaking to the wrong type of participants for your product? Or worse, simply had participants fail to show up at all to a scheduled research session? Well, Ribbon is a continuous research platform that lets organizations do user interviews and in-product surveys in real time with customers as they use your website or apps. User researchers, product designers, and product managers all use Ribbon to quickly and effectively validate product decisions with real users, helping them build products that attract and retain more customers. Ribbon is an end-to-end research platform, helping you target participants within your product, manage research incentives, run surveys and interviews, and store and share your findings. To start running in-product user interviews or surveys today, head to ribbonapp.com to get started with a free trial. Links are in the show notes. Tina Ličková is a senior user researcher and strategist and host of the UX Research Geeks podcast, where this conversation is also being published. She originally began her career in marketing and later found her calling in user experience. She co-founded and managed a service design studio that helped corporations as well as startups, and she's also led multidisciplinary teams, enabling them to build insight-driven products. Rather than me just asking the questions this time, Tina and I thought that we would have a chat and interview each other about our own experiences in UX, about podcasting, about how and why we do what we do, and about the challenges of moving fast and breaking things through digital transformation in organizations. So we're going to try something different today, and I'm talking to another UX podcaster, Tina Ličková. Hi, Tina.
Hi.
And we thought we'd just get our brains together and kind of have a little chat and share our experiences, both kind of professionally within the user experience world and also of UX podcasting, because obviously there's a growing number. But it's great to have you, Tina, on the show. Nice to chat.
Thank you. Thank you for the idea, because we had the same idea, kind of like, but you reached as the first on LinkedIn, and I was like, yay! Great minds think alike.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about yourself, Tina. Like what's your kind of day-to-day role? We'll come on to the podcast in a minute, but and what's your sort of journey into digital?
Yeah, journey into digital. Yeah, my framing in the journey of digital was I was working in HR consulting, and after 2 years, I kind of started to hate it because I didn't I didn't anymore trust the product that we were selling, and I had this framing like I want to do something on the internet, We are talking 2010, right? And I joined an advertising agency, and that was after 2 years there. There was a explosion of Facebook apps and competition on Facebook and social media as we know it now. And I was just trying to explain to my clients how it works. So I started to work on my first wireframes. Then I found out, oh, there's something like UX. And then the story goes like, okay, there's something as UX research. And that was my professional aha moment of, oh, people want to pay me for this. I will do it because it's nice. And I get to speak to people, get to learn because I'm super curious. So, and from there, I had my own company. I worked for several companies as a UX analyst, researcher, and now I am more in the research ops space, which is also a lot of fun. Trying to learn how it goes in big companies, in big IT companies, where the maturity of UX research is not really high. So that's the current challenge, I would say. What is your current challenge?
My current challenge, I think. I think the word maturity, you just used it there. I think it's amazing. I've worked in the UK government for a number of years as a contractor. So I originally started. I'm a linguist originally by training,
Okay.
and I've lived in various parts of the world, kind of working and traveling. And then I got into digital publishing quite a few years ago, but sort of that felt like it was not a an industry that's having challenges. It was a bit like kind of the record industry and photography and stuff, trying to stay kind of contemporary and relevant with the massive explosion of the internet about 15 years ago. So got into UX, did a master's and pivoted into UX about just over a decade ago. And kind of like you, I just love it. It's great to be in something that's so fast paced and transformative, and so many lovely people we work with. Generally UXers are a nice bunch, and we get to do stuff like this, which is great fun. But I think the maturity, as you were saying, maturity levels of organisations varies, and funnily enough, UK government, which kind of one would think would be slightly government be behind the curve in terms of slower than the private sector, is very much not the case in Britain. UK government with the GDS, Government Digital Service, about 10 years ago, very much embedded kind of user-centred design in the way it builds digital products and services. So it's been great to work with a number of parts of the UK government for quite a few years now, and then moving on to kind of other sectors and finding that actually their levels of maturity are a bit lower, and you're having to kind of upskill them in terms of what is agile, what is, you can actually talk to your users. You should talk to your users before you start wasting time and money building things which nobody wants or uses. So that's a challenge, but it's fun.
How did you end up in the government space? Because that's super interesting for me, to be honest.
It's kind of semi-accidental. I had a friend, a good friend of mine, had kind of started contracting, and he got a contract with HMRC, which is Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, which is basically the tax department of the UK government. And he said, "There's a role going here. Do you want to come and dip your toe in the contracting water?" So we started there. I started there about 7-8 years ago, and never looked back really. And since then, I've done stints in education, the Department for Education in the UK. I've done stints with the Cabinet Office, Ministry of Justice, the Foreign Office. And what's interesting is a lot of the challenges they face are very similar. Each department, sort of the subject matter experts, and I'm sure this is familiar to you, everyone thinks their problems are unique. But actually, in terms of digital transformation, the problems are very, very similar consistently. And it's just a question of, and actually the advantage I found of contracting is you can do lots of similar work in different places. You get lots of experience of different subject matter domains. And then you can use that and bring it on to the next place and say, well, look, you're not alone in what you're going through, that other people are struggling with similar things. And these are some ideas that have worked elsewhere.
Interesting. I majored in political science, so that's why I'm asking. And I never had a chance to be actually in that space of the official or the state services. I don't know if I would like to be on that side in Slovakia, to be honest. Yeah, our politics and digitalization is not the best, although there are very good people working on it right now. But yeah, that's why I'm asking. And it's true that in Britain it's very well done. It is one of the benchmarks that we have. There is a group called Slovensko Digital, Slovakia Digital, who has a benchmark like when it comes to front end, it's UK, when it comes to the back end, it's Estonia in the government
Yes, yeah,
digital services. So yeah.
yeah. Estonia has topped the poll for a number of years. Maybe not now, but it certainly did a few years back in terms of the most digitally advanced governments, I think, in the world. Like Estonia was regularly number one, which is great to see. I wonder if there's something to do with the kind of the size and the fact that you're starting relatively from scratch. You don't have some of the legacy issues, but you're in Vienna now, is that right? You're in
Yeah.
Central Europe.
I'm
Yeah,
in Vienna, Austria, which is just 60 kilometers far away from where I come from Bratislava. So it's
right,
after moving here from Berlin, it was very surreal
right.
being an hour at my mom's and eating lunch.
Nice, nice.
So, yeah, and it's. I mean, a lot of things are different. A lot of things are the same. The food is probably mostly the same. Also, when it comes to desserts, it's surprising. Like, oh, we have that too. Just a little. There's a little piece different, but it's the similarities. But the mentality is different, of course. I mean, 40 years of communism made something to a country, and Austria didn't have this, as well as the history and traditions and Slovak people being under their empire, Austrian-Hungarian Empire. That brings a lot of other perspectives on, yeah.
And what about that? That's fascinating. And what about sort of digital maturity levels? Is Austria kind of way ahead of or ahead of Slovakia in terms of
No,
digital
it's the
transformation?
other ways around.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If
What?
you
How
look at the
come?
Eastern Bloc, we kind of like we were poor, or we were poor countries coming from very poor circumstances, but we had the advantage of like nothing was there after the wall fell after 1989. And a lot of people, and also it's the ambition level that Eastern European have. You see it now in Ukraine. The people are still working there. They are in their basements and working and have a stable internet better than somewhere well else in Western Europe. And our the digitalization, for example, governmental in Ukraine is also way ahead of other countries. In Slovakia, it's a problem about corruption. Why it didn't happen that way that it's supposed to happen. But when it comes to, for example, even when I was living in Germany, I was surprised how many things are on paper, or that somebody asked me to send a fax. And I was like, what? So in Slovakia, you are really used to, of course, not all services are good, but when it comes to commercial services, you are all very used to some kind of standard and stable internet anywhere you are. And then you go to countries like Germany, where it depends where you are, and it depends on, so also the mentality towards digitalization is different. We don't care that much about data privacy. Germans do care about data privacy immensely. I also saw the difference when I was testing with Germans and immigrants, how they were looking into details about like how my privacy is protected was a different way of researching it on the websites or in the apps that I was working on.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, in terms of kind of usability testing with different populations,
Yeah.
there's more interest from, for example, Germans. You said in terms of kind of privacy notices and how the data is used.
It sounds super stereotypical, but it's this. Yeah, I could really see in tests. Oh, it sounded a little bit like the request to the recruitment agency was even weird. Like, we want to have people who are German born and raised, but we really wanted to explore financial mentalities, or mentalities when it comes to money, of Germans or people who had the most background living in Germany. But there was already a difference how they approached the app, how they registered, what kind of information they were looking for. And there was always this touch point like, how is my privacy being protected? Which other people didn't look that much into. I mean, depending, maybe it's also the thing, okay, I'm being tested. I look because it's a good manner to, look into it when I should be looking into it. But it was interesting that there was this very natural reflex of German nationals to explore the
Mm.
privacy.
So, what kind of organizations have you worked with, Tina, and what kind of sort of products and services have you been involved in terms of digital?
Good question. I mean, I would say I'm an all rounder, but the most I was enjoying till this point was finance. I'm one of those weirdos. Because my mom is a banker, and I grew up talking to her about money a lot. In a sense, like, okay, there is the saving account, and maybe we should invest in this, and investing into real estate makes sense, and discussing these things. So when I joined Neugelb, which was a service design agency of the second biggest German bank, Commerzbank,
Right.
it was very natural for me to look into, like, okay, what is out there which would help me to understand people and their mental states when it comes to money. So I was exploring financial psychology, the typologies in with people, and I found different models on how people have, what kind of relationships they have to money, stuff like that, and it was super interesting. That was really fun to do.
And how did you do that research? Was that kind of in person? Were they remote sessions?
I mean, I started really like classically desk research, looking into studies, and then trying to figure out, okay, how does this apply in real life when I speak to real people, and combining this, let's say, official typologies from the desk research with the real life. And we were there back then doing personas, which is, I know it's a triggering word in our business. I mean, you say persona and people, I don't know, want to slap you. And I'm still thinking, like, yeah, but you just have to use it properly.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
They have their place, but they're often
yeah,
misused, don't they?
yeah,
I agree.
yeah, yeah. Well, do you have any favorite methodology that you go back to?
One that I've used a number of times. Haven't been able to go back to it that often. Are diary studies. I mean, the thing with diary studies
Ah,
is, I mean, yes, obviously, my bread and butter is remote research sessions, typically an hour with kind of a variety of stakeholders and users and kind of understanding their needs. I mean, shadowing is always good if you can go into people's offices or places of work or homes. These days, post COVID, it's harder. But in terms of, I think just yeah, I just love diary studies. As I say, it takes. I'm sure you've done them yourself. It takes a lot more setup. It takes a lot more kind of hand holding. But there's nothing like that kind of longitudinal, whether it be a week or at most a couple of weeks, probably. People's regular use of something or interaction with the service, and then giving you feedback as you go, because they're doing it at different times of day. They're doing it at different places. Typically, they're doing it in different contexts, maybe on different devices, and you get a much more holistic view, I think, than just putting a single prototype in front of someone in a 1 hour session and saying, let's go through this together. So that's kind of one of my favorites. And how about you?
I will just stick with the diary studies, which actually I never did one. I was
Mm,
always close of doing one, but it was always a matter of, like, oh, we don't have the budget for it, or we don't have the
yeah,
time for it, or it's not anymore needed. And this is the thing where I probably see, when I look at the US and UK market, it's already a practice that is well established. In the German market, I could say, okay, it's already there as well. But then you have smaller markets like Austria, which is 8 million people, that is non comparable with
mm, mm,
UK, for
mm, mm.
example. And that's, I think there is this connected link of, like, oh, the small market, and how many or how much do you go into research, and how much do you want to spend on stuff. So I did a small thing of, like, okay, let's build this group in WhatsApp and ask people there, just on a daily basis, something, but that I wouldn't say, it's not a diary study. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the example I always use, and actually there's a case study on my website, researchable.uk, it's in the show notes, where I was working with the department in here in the UK, and it was during the pandemic. And as that rapid response to homeschooling and the challenges that millions and millions of families faced across Europe and the world, but with the focus on
Mhm.
Britain, is that the department wanted to get technology solutions out to families and children, particularly disadvantaged children. So that was in the form of hardware devices. So there were tablets and there were laptops and so on. And there was also, in parallel with that, kind of connectivity solution. So I was working on the connectivity bit, and they had this idea to, well, we can either offer hot Wi-Fi, hotspot vouchers, or we can offer like physical routers, little boxes to send out to people. Um, and they were proposing to send lots of these kind of either solution out rapidly, and obviously not an insignificant cost to the taxpayer. And I sort of said, because I was in a fortunate position of being in this small team with quite a lot of clout, I sort of said, well, hang on a minute, have you tested either of these solutions with families to see if they work? And the sort of light bulbs went on, and people said, "Well, no, we haven't." So basically, I did a diary study where we, focusing particularly on the Wi-Fi solution, we gave a bunch of families these vouchers and said, there you go, knock yourself out, and if you can just, here's a short Google survey. If you could just reply every day, just telling us about, and it was as short as possible, very simple to fill in, what your experience was, and the experience, and then we followed up with them at the end of a week and had another conversation with them and sort of heard about their experience. So we had basically the beginning and after chat kind of in depth, but we also had the feedback as we went through. And the feedback came through quite clearly that they couldn't get online and they couldn't stay online, that the Wi-Fi solution didn't work. And if it did work, it certainly wasn't suitable for kind of sustained homeschooling where children needed to be online for hours. So we flagged this. I flagged this to the team, to the department, and actually, to their credit, they listened and they canned that solution. And that to me is proof of the power of user research, because it was on the back of that piece of research. I ran it, but the team was involved. That they sort of pulled that solution. So I think again, it's one of those things where a stitch in time saves 9. And if you do the right research and understand the user needs up front, you can save a lot of time and heartache and money, because I think there would have been families struggling to get online had these solutions gone out en masse. So,
yeah, I love this moment where you're actually, it's not even the well-known aha moment, but the moment where like, oh, we just saved so much money.
And heartache and sweat and tears and
I remember one situation, we were doing a design sprint with designers. It was still at Neugelb in Berlin. And we called some users and we were just showing them some flows, really on big flip chart papers put together. And we were explaining them the flows and just asking them on their insights. And we were actually thinking about asking the users few questions for the beginning to explore how they think about money, how they want to save money, da 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 da. And one girl was just amazing. She was like, wait a second, you want to ask me this right here in the beginning? And we were like, yeah, what do you think about it? She's like, it's like going on a date with a guy who directly asked me on the first date if I want to marry him. I'm like, whoa, okay. Yeah. So that was a pretty strong one where we realized, okay, we first have to win the trust in order to ask these type of questions. And then a beautiful structure came out, like, these are the questions that are okay. These are the questions that are in further on the road. And these are the questions when we already have you as a stable client, I would say.
So what does a day-to-day kind of work look like for you, Tina? In a
Oh, now it's writing a lot of Jira tickets.
Right. Okay.
Which is, honestly, it's killing me. I won't even sugarcoat it. But we need to tidy up. And my lead was just like, okay, let's bring it together. That we are a new team in the organization, so we're trying to really establish the basics. So it's like trying to figure out, okay, how do I write this ticket so it's understandable if anybody comes to our Kanban board and wants to know where we are at. But it's really looking into the research ops basics, I would say, because I was a little bit surprised when I look at my hiring process and then me joining. I realized that the maturity of the organization when it comes to UX research is way lower than I anticipated. Right. And there are still like basics missing. And two big topics, and I'm not saying something that I can, but are like, okay, guidance, typical. There's a lot of materials out there, of course, on the internet where you can learn and stuff, but having it a little bit on a like tray, like, okay, this is how we do it in our organization, learn this and you will be fine.
So hang on, when you say guidance, you mean guidance for the organization in user-centered design? Or something else?
User-centered designs and UX research as well, because the ratio is we have 3 UX researchers and me as a research operations specialist right now, and the organization is 4,000 people. Wow. So we need to go and scale up. And also the organization is a fair believer that PMs should be talking to customers, which I am as well. And I kind of like have the task of like enable people to do research and to do it well. So we are not diminishing or jeopardizing the craft, but we still enable people with, workflows, processes, tools, infrastructure to do it and to do it well and not to. But it's obviously it's when people approach me, we have a format which I call research advice.
Right.
People come to me, say what they are trying to solve, and ask me what kind of method and what will be the research approach, and how it usually the meeting ends up is like, oh wow, that's a lot of work. Yeah, it is. You'll come to my world.
Yeah. But it's work done up front that saves time and money later, right? That's the key thing. And that's what
Yeah.
people don't get, I find, is that, yeah.
What is your favorite part in the whole research process?
Ooh, and the whole process, I think is,
Hmm.
I mean, it's a cliche to say it, but talking to the users, it's, we're very privileged in many ways that we can parachute into people's worlds. Having worked across a number of, as I mentioned earlier, kind of different government departments, one particular thing I was traveling out with. We were working on this piece of work for the Ministry of Justice, and I travelled around with bailiffs in their van, going to people's houses. I mean, it wasn't particularly cheery work, but it was a fascinating insight into a whole kind of aspect of the world that I've never really happily had to encounter, where bailiffs were going out with letters of demand for people who hadn't paid bills, kind of, and were struggling, and they were, and I remember meeting in a court building before we spent the day in the van with this guy, and I said, do I get out of the van? He said, no, you mustn't get out of the van. I haven't got a stab vest for you. You're not trained if something happens at the door. And so this sounds really negative. It was quite heavy going, but it was fascinating. So I stayed in the van, we pulled up, and I watched him go to people's doors, and kind of, in most cases, nobody was there or nobody answered the door, as you can imagine. And then in the next project, we were doing some research with governments overseas. So a bunch of people from the government digital service spent time doing a discovery in places like Kuala Lumpur and Jakarta, talking to various parts of the ministries of the government out there to understand kind of how they did public procurement. So it's so varied, and it never gets boring, because even though the methodologies are similar,
Hmm.
the context is always different. At least that's what I find. How about you?
For me, it's hard to say it because I am a person who constantly goes between introvert and extrovert. Sometimes I wake up and I don't know who I
Right,
am.
right.
Um, but it's definitely the privilege of having both possibilities of like, okay, I'm talking to people, I'm really enjoying it, I'm learning so much, especially when I'm not in the mindset. And sometimes it's that trap happens like, I already know about
Yeah,
this. But if I go back to, okay, I'm learning, then that's very high of a high value. Um, but then I love the part of analyzing, like really
yeah,
going through the videos, for example, and coding it and bringing it together and bringing it. I'm also very visual type.
right.
So I'm always trying to somehow summarize it in a visual way for the client or for the companies that I work internally with. And then again, the part of extroversy comes into it, but where I'm more of a service, where I really try to go into discussions with people
Mm,
and not just like, click, click, click another slide and present
mm,
it, but okay, what do you think about it? To see how people can empathize, where they struggle to empathize, where they don't understand, when they go through what I called, I don't know if it's a term, but post-rationalization. I met it a few times where product managers were like, we came with new insights and they're like, oh, we already have that in backlog. Like, do you,
yeah,
or are you just,
yeah,
putting it there so it makes sense and you don't have to come up with new ideas.
yeah,
So that is also for me. And if when I see that, for example, exactly product managers are like, wow, okay, this is changing and this is saving me money and this is making me or this is helping me make a decision way easier, way better,
yeah.
whatever
But
that
it's
is.
a mindset change, right? This is what I'm finding with my current client, is that there's a bunch of people bought into it, and they're very supportive of kind of outside teams like us, and are keen to kind of demonstrate this way of working. But there's an awful lot of people for whom this is like user-centered design is a completely alien way of working, and there's this endless call for tell us by X date what you will have done. what you will have delivered. And we're like, well, we don't know. Like we've just finished a discovery. We're about to start an alpha. But by, I don't know, 3 months hence, what have what will you have found out? We're like, well, that's the whole point. We don't know what we found out. You just need to trust us, and you need to let us get on and discover. And it's really, you have to keep putting yourself, again, be user-centered about it, put yourself in their footsteps and go, okay, for them, it's probably quite threatening as well, because people's reputations and, they've got their own budgets, they've got their own teams, they're trying to do the best work they can with the opportunities and situation they've got. And, people like us come in and say, move fast and break things, and, trust us, and we're going to go off and talk to 50 people remotely and then come back and give you some insights. But we don't know yet what those insights will be. I mean, I love that, but I can see why for people who aren't bought into that way of thinking, it's quite challenging, or can be.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one, and I think I'd already told the story somewhere, but it was in Prague. We were running a big design thinking workshop for a big telco company. And I had a team, I was co-facilitating, and I had a team of like really product and project managers. And I think I had a team just with guys, so not even a female element, and they were really masculine in the stereotypical way, like, what is the goal?
Right,
What is the
right.
goal? I want to have the goal. I was like, you heard the embrace uncertainty
Yeah.
thing. This is the moment where you have to
Right.
embrace it. They were like, but I'm struggling. I was like, yes, it's
Yeah,
hard.
yeah.
And I was more in that day trying to figure out how to. It was more of a psychological facilitation
Right.
on how to calm them down. But we actually got there, but they were still like, oh, this is just so open that I can't deal with
Right.
it. And that's also research. What is research about?
Yeah. And you talked about analysis earlier. I'm interested to know kind of how do you, because it's one of the things I challenges I wrestle with sometimes. You let's say you've done a few rounds of research, you've got maybe 20, 30 hours of great insights from a variety of user types, and you've got all of this kind of insight. It's then transferring that into something meaningful and concise that you can put in front of stakeholders. How do you go about that?
I was multiple times asked this question, and honestly, I don't know. My brain just works that it needs to sort things out. It needs to go to brackets, to categories, to stuff. So if I would put kind of, it's like a mapping, it's coding, deductive, inductive. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter if you tell me, okay, this is the taxonomy, let's try to find there, or come up with the taxonomy. It's just very natural for
Yeah.
me. So I can't really explain it, but for me, I very soon start to think about, okay, how am I going to, when you already start to see the patterns, okay, like this is coming out, and this is a big finding, and this is a big insight on how do I present it to
Yeah.
people? How do I make them actually have this? Oh, okay. And what I love is also to show them this is what I'm always looking for contradictions, or I call it contradictions, like people telling me something in the interviews or tests, but doing something completely different, or telling me that they would. I had this when I was recently interviewing a friend of mine in this Slovak podcast about male feminism. He was like, I want to talk about masculinity with more men, and I want to explore the topic, and I want to find out what is masculinity. And I was like, but are you doing any of that? Because he was sending me articles as a friend about this topic, but he was never actually reading
Right.
it.
Okay.
So if you want to do it, but you are not doing it, that's the contradiction that I see. And he was like, oh, yeah, you were right.
Yeah.
And and also, for example, when I was researching that in the space of financial psychology, I want to have a multi-banking app where I put everything, but I won't give you my data.
Right.
Like, wait a minute.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
this is what
there's a fascinating case study I read on Medium ages ago about, I think, a researcher from Netflix or one of the streaming platforms, and that in all the research they'd done with users, particularly when it was with parents, they would ask them about parental controls, and all of them, almost to a man and a woman, said, yes, we would definitely want parental controls on the platform. We would definitely set them up. Obviously, we want to look after our children. And that was the kind of feedback they were getting from the in-person or kind of remote research sessions. And they looked at the analytics and the kind of settings, profile settings on the platform. And the percentage of people who were actually using the parental controls was a fraction of, those who had said, yes, we want it. So kind of exactly to your point, what people were saying, what they were doing were completely different. And that's the delta, isn't it? And that's where the insightful bits sit.
Closing or going into the end, for me, it's super interesting. What was your personal motivation for your podcast?
So understanding users is my podcast. There, a little plug, and we'll put kind of links to both our podcasts in the show notes. I'm interested to hear about yours as well. I think for a bit of fun, I wanted to start something kind of on the side. Just I've had the fortune of working with lots and lots of great people, and I've had lots of fantastic guests on who've been very generous with their time and sharing their kind of knowledge and insights, and it's sort of grown over time. And I try and get a variety of guests, so kind of heads of UX, lead user researchers. I've had some business, startup founders on, and kind of conferences as well. I'm doing more of, so going to conferences, particularly now they're back in person, in the post-COVID world, and you get a real buzz. And actually recording things live in person at a conference, you can hear the buzz in the background. And what's wonderful is how excited people are to be back face to face, kind of meeting others and sharing and so on. But it's fun, doing this sort of thing is great. And tell me a bit about your podcast.
Well, it started, I came to Vienna April 2 years ago, and I was like, okay, I'm back home in middle Europe, and I want to do two things. I was thinking about a community of researchers in Middle Europe and Eastern Europe, but I was like, I'm not really a community manager, and that's a lot of work. And then I was like, maybe I do the podcast, but I was super scared about the technical side of things. And then Barbara, who was a marketing manager at the UX Tweak, approached me, and she was like, oh, we would like to have an interview with you for this. They have a series, Women in UX. And I was like, oh, that's boring. I can't just, fill out some, document and you publish a article. That's like, some people can, but me in writing, trying to answer some wise questions is just not working. So I was like, oh, you should do a podcast. And she was like, we are definitely not going to do a podcast. But what about you doing the podcast? I was like, okay, that's a match. And then I was just like, after we ended the call, I was like, what did I just said yes to? But they are supporting me on the technical side and on the marketing side, which is a very high value. And it's working out pretty well. And my kind of purpose was to bring people there, because there is a lot of dominancy from US and UK coming, because that's also where the business is the biggest when it comes to user research, or big countries like Germany. But I was thinking, okay, let's bring more people, more research traditions into it. So we are really trying to go for, okay, what are the interesting user researchers from Asia, Africa, Australia, New Zealand, whatever, Latin America. Although Latin America, we probably didn't have yet. There is a plan. And honestly, also, let's bring more women into the mix, because I think user research or research overall is more female dominated. But for that, female are not that much seen, and leader positions are more men again. So the feminist jumped out of me and was like, okay, let's bring girls into the mix, or non-binary people. And yeah, that is something that we are trying to have the diversity there as well, but just not just to speak about it, but to live it.
And how often do you publish an episode, and how many episodes have you done?
We do now every 3 weeks or once a month, because I decided to slow down, and we found that the pace we had was a little bit too much. Now we are changing a little bit the concept. We are making sure that we will make shorter episodes with focus on really just one topic and not talking all the research universe like we are doing now, but it's a different story. So that is how often we publish. You do every 2 weeks,
2
right?
weeks, and it's a fair amount of work. I mean, it's enjoyable, but to your point around kind of to keep that pace up, because you've obviously got to be looking out for guests and then scheduling in the recordings, doing the recordings, editing. But people are very generous with their time, and I think that the shorter format, is keeping the quality by keeping it short. I think is a really good idea. But yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm aiming my audience is essentially kind of a variety, really. People experienced in, I'm keen for people who maybe even experienced in this world to kind of hear from others, practitioners, also people kind of juniors coming into it, people thinking of moving into UX, hearing a variety of voices, but also I think organizations that want to do more kind of in terms of user-centered design, hearing kind of more about what we do and how we do it, I hope is of value. And it's fun, isn't it? And it feels to me like a natural extension from what we do in our day jobs, is just talking to people, asking them questions, teasing out insights. Is great.
Yeah. Although it's what I said in the beginning when we were kicking it off, it's hard to find the niche between, it's a UX research show and I'm a UX researcher. I'm being watched and how I am asking questions, and it's also not my
Of
language
course,
or
of
German where
course.
I'm better as well. But I'm here to entertain people. This is for entertaining and people to, give space, not give space, not to talk too much.
Yeah,
So this is what I still didn't figure out, and that's also
yeah,
fun. But I still didn't figure it out.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think first and foremost is enjoy it, because if one enjoys it, hopefully that comes through in the recordings,
Yeah.
and you put your guests at ease and so on. But I think that the podcasting world, as we were saying earlier on, is exploding. And there's more and more sort of podcasts coming of all sorts. And I kind of think if they want comedy, I don't pretend to be a comedian, so they can go and listen to the comedy podcast. But hopefully there's something insightful and useful in the kind of the episodes that I and we put out that kind of interest people. But it's it's great. It's great. Before we wrap up, Tina, can I ask one favor that
Yeah.
I do this with all my guests, the 3-card challenge. So I've got
Yeah, I heard.
So I've got 3
Yeah.
playing cards here, and I've written, I mean, we've touched a little bit on some of this already, but I've written trend, technique, and tool. And if you don't mind, what I'd like you to do is just pick a card. We'll pick through, one. We'll go through each of them and just.
I don't know the English names of the
Okay.
card, but I picked the J.
So the Jack of clubs is technique. We kind of touched on this, but is there you mentioned sort of diary studies, but what's your sort of go-to technique when it comes to doing a piece of research?
I mean, as for example, in UX, when I'm more on the strategic side, not on the research side, I always say pen and paper, write it,
Yep.
that it goes through your hand. But when it comes to research, I really love the concept of open doors from psychology, from psychotherapy,
Right.
where it's like you have your script, you have a guideline, interviewing guideline, but then you are speaking to the person and you suddenly see, oh, wait a minute, there is this topic being just open up, the open
Right.
door. And do I want to enter? Do I not want to enter? Because the conversation will slide somewhere else. So thinking about what doors are opening for me in the conversation is a constant thing that I have in my mind. Maybe it's not a technique itself, but yeah, that would be my
I love
answer.
that. That's really nice. And it's that, I guess there's a confidence thing in being able to do that, and that comes with experience. But I suppose the counterpoint to that is always, one is against the clock. Don't know about you, but you've got your broad list of questions that you kind of want to ask, and you're looking at the clock and you're thinking, I've got, an hour of this person's time. I've got these points I want to kind of cover off, while at the same time, as you say, letting people kind of steer you. So it's yeah.
But that's the constant thing of like, yes, I want to explore it and I want to go where the person is letting me go as well. I need to bring it somehow
Yeah.
back to what is my
Yes.
goal. And that's the combination of like my inspiration comes from
Yeah.
psychotherapy and from journalism, which is very goal
Right.
driven and doesn't do any kind of like ice breaking. You just go straight
Yeah.
away to the politician and like, and you want answers. So these type of things are for me the most biggest inspiration when it comes to techniques.
It's funny you say that, because it drives me mad listening to, much as I, there's the radio in Britain, radio news in the morning. they're very closed and they're very leading questions always. Do you think that X, blah, blah, blah? Are you confident that, blah, blah, blah? And I sit there going, no, if as a researcher, there's absolutely no way I would ask that question, or I certainly wouldn't ask it like that, because you're asking it with the intention that someone's going to give you a binary answer, or that you're going to get a particular, answer, which is the antithesis of what we're doing in some ways.
Yeah. Last question for my side, 2 questions. How much or with what are you affected in your personal life as a researcher, where people are telling you like, oh, this is you being a researcher? Is there anything like that? Like this example was one of it. Like, okay, you were listening to the radio and you were like, why are they asking this type of close question? Is there anything else?
It's funny. The other thing that I think, those pop-up surveys that you get when you use, websites or services. Can you give us 5 minutes of your time to reply? And I always used to say, no, go away. But now I try and put a professional hat on and I say yes. And I go through the surveys and I go, oh, I wouldn't have asked the question like that. And what?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, what do you want? What's your outcome? What are you trying to understand with that question? That's badly worded, or the Likert scale's the wrong number of points, or whatever. It's really sad, but it's true.
Yeah, I get you. I totally get you doing the same. Where can people follow you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, and yeah, hopefully we can put links in the show notes. So the podcast is called Understanding Users. So it's on Podbean, understandingusers.podbean.com, but it's also on Apple, Google, YouTube, Spotify, the usual places. And they're the main places really. And yourself?
LinkedIn, because I don't have any other social media. The podcast is called UX Research Geeks, because I like to geek out. And I think we are also on the most platforms, probably not really the same, but yeah, the most available ones. And my LinkedIn is my name, Tina, Lickova. Ličková.
Come on, sorry, before we wrap up, so let's do 2 more cards if you don't mind.
Okay. The
Queen is trends. So this is an interesting one. What kind of trends in user research do you foresee?
But now of course, you were also mentioning it to maybe talk about it, but I don't have much clue. I'd see artificial intelligence is going to change definitely what we do and what everybody is doing. And I use, for example, ChatGPT to help me with the driver tickets.
Right. Interesting.
I shouldn't say it out loud, but it helped me a lot because I am not a native speaker. I know how to write in English, but if something helps me, I'm completely okay. And there were some things that I just copied paste and then
last one. ACE is the tool. So kind of what's your go-to tool?
The existence of repositories is a very important step in our business. Because having the opportunity that you have everything in one place and your data are stored GDPR compliant somewhere, and you can right away analyze the videos, you can do short video snippets, so you don't have to use another software for, bring it to the stakeholders, and you can code it there. That's a game changer, definitely for me, and they're available also for freelancers. So I think that is changing a lot, or changed a lot in the last couple of years for me.
Tina, it's been fab. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for chatting.
Thank you so much as well. Really nice.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Understanding Users podcast. I hope you found something of interest that you can take away and use in your own role or organization. If you enjoyed what you heard, do please like or comment wherever you're listening, and feel free to share this episode more widely. And feel free, of course, to drop me a line with any feedback via LinkedIn or my website, researchable.uk. Links are in the show notes. You can find out more about our sponsor Ribbon and their rapid continuous research platform at ribbonapp.com. Links are also in the show notes. Join me again next time when I'll be talking to another experienced digital professional and asking them to share their wisdom, tips, and knowledge. Until then, stay safe and stay user-centered.